During a tense live interview, Piers Morgan arrived, ready to confront and challenge Ibrahim Traoré. Yet, what nobody anticipated was how Traoré diffused the moment with a single calm, sincere sentence. The audience was left in shock. Piers was rendered speechless, and people across the globe were brought to tears by the honesty and grace of his words. The studio buzzed with energy. Piers Morgan sat at his desk, scanning through his notes, his trademark scowl unchanged. His guest for the night was Ibrahim Traoré, the bold, steadfast transitional president of Burkina Faso. Confrontation energized Piers. This would not be a courteous exchange. The camera lights turned red. The producer counted down. 3, 2, 1. That evening, Piers began with a sharp tone. We're joined by a man who has become a divisive figure globally. Some label him a hero, others deem him dangerous. President Ibrahim Traoré, welcome. Traoré gave a slight nod, carrying the same composed demeanor that rattled his opponents more than fury ever could. Without pause, Piers leaned forward. You've made decisions that have cost lives. Some accuse you of playing with fire. Do you feel no remorse, or do you just conceal it? The studio air grew dense. Traoré didn't blink. He met Piers's gaze and simply replied, do you really want to know? Even Piers hesitated, taken aback by the weight of that quiet inquiry. Viewers at home leaned in closer. Something in Traoré's expression hinted at a truth no one was prepared for. The silence stretched on. Piers cleared his throat, struggling to regain control. Yes, he finally said, slightly defensive. I want to know. Don't tell me you've got nothing to regret, Mr. President. Everyone does. Traoré folded his hands. His eyes still locked on Piers. He breathed out slowly. My regret, he started, is not what you expect. The words were soft but pierced the air like a knife. Piers arched his brows, silently urging him to go on. Around the world, people were transfixed by their screens, holding their breath. Traoré's expression changed, not angry, not detached, but achingly human. My regret, he repeated, his voice trembling slightly, is that there are still children who look at me like I failed to protect them. The studio fell silent. Piers's next question caught in his throat. Online, clips of the exchange began to go viral. Children who look at me as though I've failed them. For the first time that evening, Piers's features softened, and Traoré appeared on the verge of tears himself. The next question never came. Instead, Piers set his pen down and leaned back faintly, unsure how to continue, but Traoré kept speaking. His voice was low, yet it echoed with power through the studio. I see their faces every night, he said, in refugee camps, on streets marked by war. Children with empty eyes, asking why we let this happen to them, and I have no answer worthy of them, not yet. A hush blanketed the room. Even the production crew stood still. Piers's usual fierceness had disappeared. He now looked at Traoré as if seeing him anew. How do you carry that? Piers finally murmured. Traoré shut his eyes briefly, then reopened them, moist but unwavering. Because if I don't carry it, he said, who will? Candace Owens, silently seated off-camera as a guest analyst, was captured in a close-up shot. She bit her lip, visibly holding back emotion. It was the first time the audience had seen her vulnerable. She whispered, barely audible through her mic. I've never heard anything like this before. Millions of viewers at home shared the sentiment. The questions that followed grew sharper. Piers was fully in his element now, leaning forward, jabbing his finger into the air with every word. You speak of sacrifice, Mr. Traoré, Piers said, his voice climbing in volume. But Burkina Faso's economy is faltering. You've expelled foreign military forces. You've severed connections with powerful allies. Some claim you've condemned your people just to make a statement. Do you actually care about them, or is this all just about your pride? The audience in the studio shifted uneasily. Even Traoré's translator appeared tense, but Traoré didn't blink. He stared back at Piers, as calm as a still lake at sunrise. For a second, it seemed as though he might say nothing at all. Then, softly, he replied, do you think I sleep through the sound of children crying? The sentence hit like a stone, dropped in a still pond. Piers froze mid-breath. Even those watching from home felt the weight. Silence swallowed the studio. Traoré adjusted his jacket slightly, as if readying himself for the next moment. The tension in the room deepened. This wasn't just an interview anymore, it was becoming something no one could look away from. The camera zoomed in on his face. His voice remained low, but it held the strength of something unbreakable. I stood one morning outside a school, Traoré began. There was a little girl, no older than 6. She was holding her brother's hand. He was already gone, but she didn't know it yet. She just kept whispering, he's sleeping, he's sleeping. He paused. The studio was completely still. She looked up at me, he continued, his eyes now glistening, and asked if I could wake him up. And I couldn't. A quiet gasp passed through the crowd. Even Piers remained silent. I carry her eyes with me every single day, Traoré said. I carry the eyes of every child who's ever asked me to fix something. I haven't been able to fix it, and that's why I keep fighting. Not because of ego, but because I don't want to see another little girl ask me to wake up her brother. Piers's face softened ever so slightly. His pen sat still on the desk. No one had anticipated this, least of all him. For the first time in his broadcasting career, Piers Morgan was speechless. The words lodged in his throat. He looked at Traoré, then glanced down at his notes, which suddenly seemed trivial, even foolish. The cameras kept rolling. Ibrahim Traoré sat quietly, his gaze unwavering, his hands folded before him. He waited. The audience didn't clap. They cried. People dabbed at their eyes, unable to look away. On social media, clips of the moment of that one haunting sentence, "Do you think I sleep through the sound of children crying?" were already going viral. Comment sections overflowed with hearts, crying emojis and words like, "This man is a real leader. I never knew his story before. Now I can't stop crying." Even Piers, known for his iron composure, had to clear his throat before speaking again. When he did, his voice was softer. "How do you keep going?" he asked, "when the weight of it all must feel unbearable." Traoré simply looked at him, a faint and tired smile on his lips. What he said next would leave everyone watching in pieces. Piers's next question came sharp. Why not step aside, if the cost is so high? Why drag yourself and your people through all this suffering? The words hovered in the room. The cameras cut to Traoré. He said nothing for a long moment, so long that the audience shifted awkwardly in their seats. Even Piers began to frown, likely expecting a dodge or deflection. Finally, Traoré exhaled and said quietly, "Because my people never got to step aside." The room went still again. When terrorists stormed their homes, he continued, "They didn't. You get to choose. When their crops were set on fire, they didn't get to choose. When their children went hungry, they didn't get to choose. So why should I?" The audience began to stir. A woman in the front row brought her hand to her mouth already, in tears. Even Piers didn't respond immediately. Somehow Traoré's steady voice made the moment even heavier. The studio lights seemed to dim. The only sound was breathing. People watching from home reached for tissues. As the cameras continued rolling, Traoré reached into his breast pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This," he said, lifting it gently, "is why I don't quit." The audience leaned forward. Piers leaned forward. "It's from a mother," Traoré explained. "A woman I met last month. After her son was killed defending his village, she gave me this letter." He unfolded it with care, his hands calm under the weight of what he was about to say. She wrote, he began reading aloud, "President Traoré, if you must fall forward so that even as you fall, we know someone was fighting for us." He paused, staring down at the paper. Then he raised his eyes to Piers, his voice barely more than a whisper. "How do I tell her son that I quit?" Piers swallowed, his pen slipping from his fingers and landing softly on the desk. For the first time in his career, his sharp and confrontational expression completely softened. At home, viewers wiped away silent tears. Online comment sections overflowed. "I've never cried watching an interview before. He's speaking for all of us." Piers cleared his throat, but his voice cracked anyway. "You talk about children," he said, trying to stay composed, "and mothers and sacrifice, but what about you, Mr. Traoré? What have you sacrificed?" The question appeared to catch Traoré slightly off guard. His eyes dropped to the floor. When he looked up again, something in him had shifted. "I've sacrificed myself," he said. Simply the words landed with force. He explained, "My family barely sees me. My own mother fears for my life every day. I have lost friends. I have lost sleep. And sometimes, I think I've even lost myself." His eyes now shimmered with tears, but he didn't look away. The studio audience barely breathed. Piers sat back in his chair, visibly shaken. His lips trembled as he whispered, almost to himself, "I've never heard this before." Those 6 words rang through the studio like a bell. Even the producers behind the scenes stood frozen in place. Around the world, millions of hearts cracked open. The cameras kept filming, but no one moved. Even the makeup artist standing in the corner had stopped, holding a tissue to her cheek. Ibrahim Traoré's words lingered like a prayer. "I've sacrificed myself," he'd said. And then the silence spoke more loudly than any words. Piers looked at him differently now. The usual fire in his eyes had faded, replaced with something gentler, something closer to respect. He leaned forward, his voice softened. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. Traoré took a deep breath, his shoulders heavy. "I regret that they still suffer," he said. "I regret that I haven't done enough yet, but I cannot regret standing here, because if I leave, who will they have?" The audience was wiping their eyes. Even the cameraman's hands trembled slightly. The first time, Piers didn't interrupt, and across homes everywhere, viewers clutched their hearts, realizing they were witnessing something far beyond politics. From the back of the studio, someone whispered loud enough for all to hear, "He's telling the truth." No one knew exactly who had said it, but it didn't matter, because that one quiet sentence broke something open. The audience shifted. People murmured in agreement, nodding through their tears. Traoré scanned the room. He noticed a young woman in the second row, her cheeks streaked with mascara as she cried silently into her sleeve. Piers saw it too, and for the first time that night, he broke character as host. He turned to the audience and asked, "What do you see when you look at him?" A man stood up, his voice trembling. "I see someone who cares more about strangers than our own politicians care about us, he said. The crowd murmured louder now. Traoré remained silent, his hands folded calmly in his lap, letting their voices fill the space. One by one, others began to speak. They called him a hero. They called him hope. And Piers just sat there. His eyes were glistening and he was struggling to keep control. Then, a final question came, not from Piers, not from the audience, but from the director, speaking quietly into Piers's earpiece. "We're out of time," the director said. "Wrap it up." But Piers didn't move. He stared at Traoré for a long silent moment. Then he asked, "What would you say if the whole world was listening right now?" The audience held its breath. The camera zoomed in on Traoré's face. He looked straight into the lens and spoke calm, heartfelt and unshakable. "The people you ignore today are the people who will bury your children tomorrow. So choose love. Choose them. Choose humanity before it's too late." The room fell into silence. You could hear a pin drop. Piers blinked rapidly, but no words came. His throat tightened. He only nodded slowly, almost defeated but deeply moved. Within minutes, the clip hit the internet. By night's end, it was everywhere. "The people you ignore today are the people who will bury your children tomorrow, so choose love. Choose them. Choose humanity before it's too late." Back in the studio, Piers remained behind, still in shock. The man who usually devoured his guests had nothing left to say. He just sat in his chair staring at his hands. Producers rushed about. Phones rang off the hook. The audience filed out, silently, many wiping their eyes. Meanwhile, Traoré quietly slipped out the back door of the studio into the cool London night. Already, strangers on the street stopped him. A woman clutched his hand and whispered, "Thank you. I'll never forget tonight." He smiled softly, then kept walking. But deep down, even he was beginning to understand. He had sparked something far bigger than himself. That same night, in Burkina Faso, the streets were filled with joy and pride. Families crowded around radios and television sets, watching clips of their president's words. People cried openly, embracing one another. Children ran through the streets, shouting his name. "He spoke for us," they yelled. "He told them the truth." At her home in Ouagadougou, Traoré's mother watched the clip on a small TV screen. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks as she whispered a prayer for him. She picked up her phone and sent him a short message. "My son, you've carried our pain into the light. Be strong. We are with you." In his London hotel room, Traoré read her message alone. For the first time that day, his calm broke. He pressed his forehead into his hands and wept quietly for all the people he hadn't yet been able to save, for all the mothers still waiting for their sons, for all the children going to sleep hungry tonight. And for a moment, he wondered if what he'd done was enough. But then, he stood. He wiped his eyes, and he prepared himself, because tomorrow the world would still be watching. The next morning, Ibrahim Traoré was already dressed and ready to leave his hotel when his phone rang. It was Piers Morgan. His voice was softer now, different. "Ibrahim," he began awkwardly. I just wanted to say thank you." There was a long pause. "You didn't just speak to me last night," Piers continued, his voice cracking slightly. "You spoke to everyone, and I'd like you to come back. There are more things I think the world needs to hear from you." Traoré stayed quiet for a moment before replying. "Thank you, Piers," he said gently. "I'll come back, but only if you're ready to hear, not just to ask." The line was silent, but finally Piers answered, "I'm ready." When Traoré hung up, he stood by the hotel window and looked out over the bustling city below. Even though the sky was gray, the streets were alive with movement, people rushing, children laughing, strangers brushing past one another, and for the first time in a long time, he felt hope, not for himself but for all of them. The next evening, Traoré returned to the studio for a follow-up segment. Outside, a crowd had already gathered, waiting in the rain just to catch a glimpse of him. Some held signs. "You speak for us. Truth still matters." "Thank you, Ibrahim." Piers met him at the door, this time not as a challenger, but almost like a friend. His eyes looked tired, but there was something softer in them now. As they walked down the corridor to the studio, Traoré glanced at the cameras, the lights, the waiting audience. He knew what he was about to say would matter just tonight. But long after, he paused at the door and took a breath. In his mind, he saw the faces of his people, farmers working dry earth. Children with wide, hungry eyes, mothers holding their breath for their sons to return from war. When the door opened and he stepped under the blinding lights again, the room fell silent. This was no longer just an interview. This was a reckoning. The segment began. Piers leaned forward, voice trembling slightly. "You spoke last time about humanity. But tell me, Mr. Traoré, why does it matter if the world listens? People don't change." There was a long, heavy silence. The audience waited. Traoré's hands rested calmly on his lap. He didn't rush. Finally, he looked directly at Piers and spoke. His voice was soft, because even if they don't change, you can. Piers froze, his mouth open. The words sank in like stones dropped into deep water. In the audience, someone gasped quietly. A young woman wiped tears from her cheek. Traoré continued, "Change doesn't start with the world. It starts with you, one heart at a time." The silence that followed was deafening. Piers lowered his gaze, speechless, and across the world, millions of viewers watching in their kitchens, on their phones, in their living rooms, sat with tears streaming down their faces, clutching their chests. In that single moment, politics faded. Humanity stood bare. When the cameras stopped rolling, the applause didn't. People stood. Many cried. Some reached out just to shake his hand. Piers approached him, his voice breaking. "Thank you, Ibrahim. I'll never forget this." Traoré smiled faintly and replied, "It's not about me, Piers. It's about what you do next." That night, as he left the studio, the rain had stopped. The air felt clean, hopeful. The same crowd from earlier was still there, waiting, cheering. Traoré waved to them, his heart full. He knew he couldn't fix everything in a day or a week, but he had planted a seed, one that might grow even in the hardest ground. And maybe, just maybe, the world was ready to water it. If this story moved you, touched your heart, or even brought tears to your eyes, don't forget to hit the like button. Subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment below about the part that touched you most. Let's share this moment of humanity together and keep the conversation alive. Truth over politics.